Ladies and gentlemen, I guess we can use the situation with the sinkhole as a reason for starting a little bit late. Seems to be delaying people. But the ambassador tells me the RCMP is particularly efficient, which he was suggesting we should feel proud of in conducting him here in a very effective way. And that's true, having worked with RCMP in similar situations. So, good evening. Je suis très content que vous êtes ici pour notre dernière soirée ici à l'hôtel Sheraton. C'est vraiment un honneur d'avoir quelqu'un de si remarqué comme notre dernier conférencier de l'année, the Ambassador Bruce Heyman. I, as you know, am the president. No, I'm not actually. As of a couple, as of maybe, I don't know, like I'm coming on 2 hours. I am now the past president of the. Do I seem to be smiling? But it's a reflection of the great pleasure that I have experienced in being the president of the Canadian International Council in Ottawa and working with all of you and fellow citizens and doing something I think in a meaningful way for our country. Because the positions we take as we go into the international arena, they come happily because we live in a democracy from us. And so as we talk about and reflect upon these issues, to have had the honor and privilege, this role of the most active branch of this national institution has been very special to me. So my smile reflects the specialness I feel and perhaps the opportunity to embrace some other challenges and projects in a fuller way as well. I'll let you know who our new president is, but I'll keep you a little suspended because that just maybe makes for a better show. I don't know. So thank you very much. In my role that you're used to me playing is also to tell you of our next event, and it's quite an interesting one. Global Affairs Canada, with the new government, has reaching out to the Canadian National Council and really giving us an opportunity to play the role that is there for us, which is to help the government engage with citizens. Our Politics in the Pub group is doing that on Monday, June the 27th at a new venue, a little spiffier and right in the heart of the market called the Red Lion, not in its previous location. And so we're very pleased that Asan Torkaman, the chair of the Politics in the Pub, is leading our team very effectively. That is a model for doing things with foreign affairs or global affairs nationally. In fact, they're wanting us to do some things with other branches in Canada, perhaps a Politics in the Pub in Montreal. So we're pleased and thrilled to be at the center of that, not surprisingly, given that we are the branch here in Ottawa. You know, we have 10 programming teams, so unless one of them dreams something up between now and September, that's the last event for the season, the one on June 27th. So tonight is a very special evening, and also for me, because my research is in the area of Canada-US relations. It's something I care very deeply about, and all Canadians care deeply about, which is part of the fun of working on that topic. President Obama is coming later this month, as well as the Mexican president. They'll do their North American Leaders Summit. President Obama will address Parliament. So this is a really interesting and exciting time to have you, Ambassador, to speak to us. I don't want to put too much pressure on, maybe I shouldn't, but you are so you've just come from the Arctic, the chance to talk from coast to coast to coast. You can revisit your friends that you made in the Arctic tonight. And we just have, I think, if I can say, as a country, such a great feeling for the United States, in a sense that you're a great ally to have. And so please feel you're amongst terribly good friends when you address us tonight. The format will be that the ambassador will come to this podium. When he's finished his remarks, he will go to that far chair. David Halton will engage him from that chair, and I'll be here, which is the format we've used for our last two events, the one with Lord David Owen and the Honourable Bill Graham. So some of you will be used to that. Now let me tell you a little bit about the speakers that will be with you tonight. Ambassador Heyman is formerly based in Chicago, a close associate of President Obama, which is kind of cool for anybody to think you're friends, because this is this major figure, and so many Canadians feel very warmly towards. For 15 years, before becoming ambassador to Canada, you were the managing director of private wealth management at Goldman Sachs, and served on a number of boards, including one, I think, very much like this one, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, which I think we can learn from as a model, and maybe at dinner we'll have a chance to benefit from that. David Halton, this is an evening in conversation with David Halton, and I think everyone in this room knows him well, but it's interesting, the younger people, David, I'm sorry to say, we have to tell them more about you. But it's always a great pleasure. David spoke about a book to the branch recently. He is, or rather was, the CBC's chief political correspondent in Washington for almost 15 years, from 1991 to 2005, becoming almost an honorary American. So you must really have a very strong sense of this relationship, and that's wonderful that you will be engaging with the ambassador in that way. He's also a former chief political correspondent for the CBC in Ottawa, and the book I mentioned about his father, who, as I was saying to the ambassador, was our version of Edward R. Murrow, so you best understand the role of David's father, and one that he very similarly took up in his own career. And then Margaret Huber will thank you, two gentlemen. She is our new president. And she has had a long and distinguished career at Global Affairs. She was our High Commissioner in Pakistan, our ambassador in Iraq during the fighting, and most recently, before retiring just in almost the last months, a couple of years, was Canada's Chief of Protocol. So we're in very good hands under your leadership. Look forward to hearing you at the podium a little bit later, but now, Ambassador Heyman, over to you, sir.
Well, good evening. Thank you, David. Congratulations on your tenure here, and thanks for that kind introduction. And thanks to the Canadian International Council's National Capital Branch for the invitation to join you here tonight. It's always a pleasure for me to speak to groups such as yours, both to share my enthusiasm, unbounded enthusiasm about the US-Canada relationship, and also to get a chance to listen and to learn from others, talking about the interesting topics with accomplished and knowledgeable contacts, such as your new president, and gaining incredible insights that are going to be so valuable for me as I take in so much of what you have to lend to what we do within the embassy. So you're right, I just got back from this amazing tour to the Arctic, organized by your great government here for foreign chiefs of mission, 15 locations in 9 days. So I've traveled now all across this great country of yours, and I have loved every single place. And I can just say very simply, wow, the Arctic is something else. I hope some of you were able to follow some of my travels on social media. I try to post very frequently the trip, but it's all there as it stays in the internet universe forever, so you can always go back and see it. But I will tell you, the experiences of just a few days ago, being in the midst of heavy cold and snow, is still hard for me to even get my head around, especially when you're north of the tree line and there are no trees and the sun doesn't set. So 24-hour sunlight. I'm still trying to catch up on my sleep, by the way. But the Arctic is actually a good starting point for me to talk about the vast and productive US-Canada relationship. This is the most comprehensive commitment to shared prosperity, I think, in the history of the world. We are both Arctic nations and committed to global leadership on Arctic issues and stewardship. In March, President Obama and the Prime Minister Trudeau, announced a new partnership to embrace the opportunities to confront the challenges in the changing Arctic. With Indigenous and Northern partnerships and responsible science-based leadership, the United States, we took over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council from Canada last year, and we are building on your great work with a focus on addressing the impacts of climate change. The Arctic Ocean safety and security and stewardship, and improving, of course, the economic and living conditions for those that live in this challenging location. And of course, the Arctic is just one of a number of areas that we cooperate to advance our shared goals and values. I had the privilege, and I would say the distinct privilege, to be at the White House as Prime Minister Trudeau's first official visit to the United States, and his visit there with President Obama. It was a remarkable event. The first state dinner in honor of a Canadian Prime Minister in almost 20 years, and only the 10th state dinner to that point that the President had held. And witnessing firsthand the incredible reception that Prime Minister Trudeau and his family received while I was standing at Andrews Air Force Base at the bottom of the stairwell when his plane arrived. And seeing that great family greet the crowds, listen to our shared national anthems, and immediately watch them go out and greet young children. For me, seeing the streets of Washington filled with Canadian-American flags up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. As the US Ambassador, there just couldn't be a better moment for me. And attending the very warm bilateral meetings between our leaders in the Oval Office, as I sat back and literally sat next to the President's desk with my arm up on it and watched the two of them have that conversation. Yes, as good as you had heard it was better. In about 3 weeks, we look forward to having President Obama here in Ottawa, where in addition to the trilateral meetings with the leaders of Canada and Mexico, he will address a special session of Parliament, further reinforcing our strong friendship. So for those of you who've been fortunate enough to be inside our embassy here in Ottawa, you may have seen the quotations up in the cupola on the top floor by 4 of our former presidents who have addressed Parliament. And there are 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So I thought I'd read those quotes for each of those presidents that are there. And these are the quotes that I see every day when I walk in to my office. So the first quote was from Dwight Eisenhower, November 14th, 1953. Here on this continent, we present an example that other nations someday surely will recognize and apply in their relationships among themselves. And then, of course, John F. Kennedy, May 17, 1961. Geography has made us neighbors. History has made us friends. Economics has made us partners. And necessity has made us allies. Then there was Ronald Reagan. It was September 28, 1988. Let the 5,000-mile border between Canada and the United States stand as a symbol for the future. Let it forever be not a point of division, but a meeting place between our great and true friends. And then Bill Clinton, President Clinton, April 8, 1997. As we stand on the threshold of a new millennium, let us build a future of peace and prosperity, of freedom and dignity for our continent and beyond. These moving words remind me daily, literally daily, of our historic bonds. Our relationship truly spans the entire spectrum of our citizens' lives. Our governments engage at all levels, from federal cooperation on matters of international security to health or law enforcement assistance across the border to trade and investment delegations from states and provinces. Non-governmental institutions help to cement government ties, like national universities engaged in joint research, local clubs promoting cross-cultural exchanges, or environmental groups looking to protect our shared waters and forests. And of course, we have thousands of small and medium-sized, and large too, companies engaged in hundreds of billions of dollars of annual trade in goods and services. In 2015, it was $669 billion. Let's put that in some perspective. That's more than the US trades in goods with Japan, India, South Korea, Brazil combined. Canada trades more goods in one day with the United States than it does in 2 months with France. In fact, some 3/4 of Canada's total merchandise exports are destined for the United States. Our businesses on both sides are also heavily invested across the border. We make foreign direct investment in both of our countries, and that amounts to about $700 billion. All of this is buttressed by perhaps the most important ties of all: personal links of family and friends. Did you know 400,000 people on average cross our shared border every single day? Many of them to visit colleagues and friends and relatives. Come on, who among you, let's see a raise of hands, has a relative or a close friend that lives in the United States? Ha, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. I don't think you'll see that kind of show of hands for any other country anywhere in the world. So we have this great, broad, deep, vast relationship that includes government, business, public and private institutions, individual citizens. So what are we doing to expand this relationship and enhance it? So I can tell you that the US Embassy and within the US government, we never take this relationship for granted. Well, nobody should take any relationship you have for granted, whether it's a personal relationship, a business relationship, a relationship between two countries such as ours. Every day, we're working to continue to enhance our cooperation, from fighting terrorism to facilitating cross-border travel. Do you have your Nexus card? If not, you should be getting your Nexus card for easy, fast travel across that border. And word has it, a lot of people will be lining up for travel this summer. That's the fast path to get into the United States. Okay, you name it, we're probably working on it together. There's a process that we have that not many people really talk about, but if you're a US official and you want to travel to another country, that you literally have to call in and get what is called country clearance. So if you're working and you're traveling on official business, you need country clearance. So this request comes into the embassy and is given to literally me, but good news, I delegate that, because you will soon see that if I didn't, I'd be spending my whole life actually giving approval. You see, in each of the last 2 years, we have had approximately 10,000 visitors on official US government business to Canada. 10,000. I had them check the numbers. I went back, I said, are you sure that's 10,000? What are they all doing here? Well, they're doing just what I've been talking about. They've been meeting with counterparts to talk on trade, about the border, about climate change, about energy, about scientific research, about consumer protection, about food safety, about law enforcement, about international security, about banking oversight, and on and on and on. I could tell you, and we could do a deep dive session on any one of these, but I think my overview today is better focused on the big picture. I know we've had a lot of foreign policy and international relations thinkers here, and we could talk about a variety of fascinating topics. But I know a favorite topic at the moment is the current US presidential election. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about that tonight. So, I do want to tell you, though, more about one of my favorite initiatives. It's something that doesn't gather many headlines because it's not very glamorous. But it is very, I would say very, very important, and that's regulatory cooperation. All of the issues we discuss with our Canadian counterparts are important, and many yield significant benefits for our citizens. But I'll tell you why I'm specifically drawn to this idea of regulatory cooperation. It's because I think regulatory cooperation is one of those areas where we have had and will continue to have concrete results that can and do provide immediate benefits to both sides of the border. Benefits for businesses, benefits for consumers and governments. It's one of those win-win-win scenarios. Many of these wins may seem small, but they add up. And some can end up being incredibly important in stoking trade and investment and economic growth, upon which our joint prosperity all depends. So the idea is really simple. Wherever we share virtually identical regulatory goals, we should coordinate our regulatory actions, our language standards, and rules to make sure we're not imposing unnecessary costs on businesses or consumers just simply to comply with different regulations that accomplish the same result. Now, there can certainly be good reasons for different regulations, or different standards, or different labels. But our primary responsibility, both of us, is to protect our citizens' health and protect the safety and protect the welfare and honor their preferences when they go out and make purchases. But we need to get away from what I call the narcissism of small differences. If we're going to have different standards or rules or labeling requirements, we should be able to articulate a good reason for doing so. Small regulatory differences, well-intentioned as they may be, put sand in the gears of economic engines. We benefit most from the continued integration of our economies when we smooth out these differences. I think we can all agree that regulations that protect our health and our safety and our environment are important and absolutely necessary. But what often happens, however, is that our regulatory agencies set out to accomplish similar outcomes, but come up with slightly different regulations. And these differences mean that companies need to go through 2 sets of testing, obtain 2 sets of approvals, produce 2 sets of labels, or even produce slightly different products altogether. And if they want to sell into both markets, this is really hard. So let me give you some examples. Energy efficiency. Energy efficiency labeling on household appliances appears both in the US and Canada. We're trying to give customers basically the same general information about energy efficiency and cost. But the data are different because the testing procedures are different. The appliance industry has been clear with us that these seemingly minor misalignments impose substantial cost and can make it nearly impossible to sell a particular appliance across the border. The standards are continuously being updated to accommodate new technologies. Well, gosh, that's a good thing. But the pace and manner of those updates differ across the border, which then creates even a larger gap between the testing and labeling requirements. How about another example? Our consumer health products regulators in both countries have robust processes to examine, assess, test, approve products, the production facilities for those products, etc. If we could recognize each other's regulatory oversight as meeting our own standards, we could potentially avoid costly, duplicative reevaluations and testing. When a Canadian or American regulator assesses that a product, a facility, or a process has met a standard that both countries could agree upon, we should have mechanisms in place to allow that product be freely sold in both markets. According to Consumer Health Products Canada, a trade association for that industry, a policy of mutual recognition would have a tangible impact on trade, and the cost of retesting products could range from $150,000 to $190,000 per product per year, depending on the type of testing required. Mutual recognition would enable appropriate products approved by Health Canada, for example, to be shipped directly to customers in the United States or vice versa. What we have to appreciate is that there are probably tens of thousands of these products, and all sorts of regulations and standards and labeling extend across the entire economy, from dog food to lighting to airplane parts to specialty chemicals. And given the size of our trading relationship, almost $670 billion, even incremental efficiencies from regulatory cooperation can produce huge gains. Now, you'll be pleased to know that we're indeed already looking at these efficiencies. Our primary mechanism for this has been something called the Regulatory Cooperation Council, the RCC. That's an intergovernmental process that brings together policy leaders, regulators, and stakeholders to try to do exactly what we need to do: align our regulations where possible to reduce trade frictions while delivering on our commitment to health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. In fact, we just concluded a successful set of RCC meetings in Washington in early May. Literally hundreds of participants of government and industry got together in 2 days of meetings to advance our agenda on this front. And these were not just people all gathered in a big room to hear presentations. There were some 20 breakout rooms where specific regulators and stakeholders met to identify paths forward on everything from locomotive emissions to packaging certifications. During the RCC event, the US Food and Drug Administration and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency signed the Food Safety Systems Recognition Arrangement. This is a major achievement and the results of the dedication and hard work for many on both sides of the border. This arrangement means the United States and Canada can recognize our food safety systems are comparable. What are the practical benefits of this? Well, it will reduce the need for inspections over time, allowing for more efficient passage of low-risk food products across our shared border, and permitting safety inspections from both countries to focus their attention on higher-risk products. I'm immensely proud of all the work that's going on, but I'd really like to see us think bigger, to move away from this seemingly, and I've been to several of these meetings, whack-a-mole approach. Bad regulation, fix that one. Bad regulation, fix that one. Where we can look for suggestions for regulations to align. A more holistic approach by which the default is, if we could get there, where the default is we recognize each other's approvals unless we can identify specific reasons why we shouldn't. Is that going to be easy? No. It's hard. You can imagine how difficult that this can be bureaucratically, politically, logistically, but I think it's worth doing. I think it's worth working on. If you think about the impact of common standards is not worth the effort, I thought I'd share with you a story. The story was on NPR that they did a little while ago on what is called the humble innovation at the heart of the global economy. So this is a little bit of a story about regulatory cooperation, but also a story about innovation. The innovation wasn't so much a product or an invention, but it had to do with standardization and the benefits it can have in trade. So it's the story of the intermodal shipping container. You know, those big containers you see at ports or on trains or on the back of tractor trailers. The NPR piece itself draws from a book about the shipping container called The Box and how the shipping container made the world smaller and the world economy bigger. Now, according to the story, before standardized shipping containers, ships were just willy-nilly loaded up. Packages of all different sizes, they just throw them in the ship, and all various things were carrying from fruit to machinery. Everything was packed differently, loaded and unloaded largely by manual labor. it could apparently take weeks or even large teams of people to load and unload a ship back then. Well, some form of containerization was in development over decades in the 19th and early 20th century, and there were efforts to standardize containers for shipping. But the innovation that really put the container at the center of global commerce came from the owner of a trucking company. His name was Malcolm McLean. And in the 1950s, McLean wanted to avoid the traffic that was gumming up his deliveries up and down the East Coast of the United States. So he came up with the idea of putting his trucks directly on the ship. Drive the truck right on the ship, sail up and down the coast instead. The idea obviously then morphed into separating the engine of the truck from the cargo part, and the intermodal container was born. A standard container that could be used across different modes of transportation, from ship to train to truck. And although the idea spread relatively quickly, adopting it globally took years of negotiation among stakeholders, from businesses to governments to labor. You can certainly guess what this innovation did to the employment of dock workers. Transport companies, ports, and governments had to make huge investments. The result is not just a standardized container for easy shipping. It's a fundamental factor in our ability to move goods cheaply and efficiently around the world, and thus enables the very existence of our global supply chain. Now, according to a 2013 Economist article, McLean found that containerized lowered the cost of loading a ship from $5.83 per ton to 16 cents. The piece makes the bold but unbelievable claim, supported by academic studies. Get this? The containers have boosted globalization more than all the trade agreements in the past 50 years put together. But these gains would not exist without everybody agreeing on a standard. Imagine if China or Britain or France all wanted their own container standard. My point here is that aligning our regulations and standards can have huge impacts. And of course, that's not to say that trade agreements don't matter. They're incredibly important in removing barriers to trade, creating those globalized supply chains that are so fundamental to economies like ours, and delivering huge benefits to consumers in terms of expanded choices and low prices. But even in trade agreements, creating rational rules-based approaches to managing trade is among the most important benefits. And so I can't mention trade agreements without adding my strong endorsement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the most ambitious, the most comprehensive trade agreement in decades. The US administration is working closely with Congress to move forward on this deal. And I hope that when the Canadian government has concluded its consultations and analysis, it will reach the conclusion that being part of TPP is in Canada's interest. By the way, TPP has an entire chapter on regulatory coherence, which seeks to foster in all member countries an open, fair, and predictable regulatory environment. All of the efforts I've described above, from TPP to Regulatory Cooperation Council to our collaboration on the Arctic, are part of a broader and critically important process for us to forge even closer ties, not only between the United States and Canada, but also between our two countries and the rest of the world. Our shared values and close cooperation enable us to play a constructive role together in addressing conflict, tension, and emergent situations around the world. We're at our best when we work in harmony toward peaceful and productive engagement, whether through trade or diplomacy, development, or cultural and educational exchange. When people are vested in the stability and prosperity of other countries, they have an incentive to strengthen and expand that stability and prosperity. If you have a trading relationship with a company in Vietnam, You have an incentive to help make sure the relationships are good with Vietnam. And even more so if you have an actual investment in a factory or a business. And if you've studied in Brazil, or you're an artist who performs regularly in South Africa, you have an interest in the welfare of those countries. All of these interactions help to weave the fabric of peace and prosperity around the world. We're very lucky that fabric between the United States and Canada is the strongest in the world. I applaud your group's commitment to continuing to strengthen it globally. Thank you very much.
And Ambassador Heyman, I think we could tell you're from Chicago. The focus on commodities and the movement of commodities, which is the central part of the story of Chicago, like our Winnipeg. In thinking about regulation and picking up from your address, one of the concerns I think for Canadians is who's going to actually decide the regulations. And if someone wanted to be a little bit difficult about it, they'd say, well, would the Americans agree to the regulations that Canadians passed? Because why should Canadians agree to regulations Americans passed? So what is the mechanism? Could you talk to us more about, maybe it would be something like the International Joint Commission, where we have a formula there where we seem to have to arrive at a consensus. How do we because I, for myself, would say this is a great idea, but how do we get over that problem?
So thank you again very much for giving me the opportunity to address the organization. And so let's talk about regulations for a minute. There are existing regulations and there are new regulations. So existing regulations where there are differences, those are the hardest to actually deal with because everybody digs their heels in a bit in terms of believing their way is the right way. But in new regulations, no standards have actually been set yet. And it gives you an opportunity where I think our two governments, the leaders of our two governments, can come together and mandate that they work together on a going forward basis to create jointly this set of regulations. That happens more easily where we're doing something together and we're actually creating something at the same time. Where it's a bit more challenging is a regulation is set on something that is not yet in the other country. And so you end up finding a new innovation or creation or new strategy or new process that the country in which it's starting in ends up regulating. And then I think you have to sit down and it has to be dictated from top down because from a bottoms up perspective, everyone will have their bias of their job, their position, their regulatory process. And you have to sit down and say, you should adopt the other regulation unless you have good reason not to. And if you do, let's go through it. Because if it is that good, then we should sit down with our counterpart across the table and they can work together to develop, again, a process in which we can work that out. But it's a mindset of strategy versus tactics. And I think we're very effectively tactically handling the whack-a-mole, but I think also strategically. I think the reason I wanted to point it out, this recognition of food safety, and the United States has not done this for just one other country in the world. So to sit down and just say, you have a different process to developing food safety in Canada, but we're going to recognize it as meeting standard, even though it is not exactly our process. I think that, and I highlighted that as an example for regulators to look at and to see if they can come to agreement.
Ambassador, welcome again.
Thank you.
You'd mentioned earlier in your earlier remarks that the North American Leaders Summit will be meeting later this month in Ottawa. The three amigos are meeting at a time of some uncertainty, I think one can say, about the future of NAFTA, an agreement that's under attack, of course, from both the left and the right in the US. But there's also a sense among supporters of NAFTA that The agreement really needs a new jolt of energy, perhaps a wider vision that would take NAFTA beyond trade to environmental and energy cooperation. Do you share that assessment, and are you confident that we're going to see some major progress coming out of the Three Amigos meeting?
Wow, there are a lot of questions you slipped in there. You must be a professional at this. So let's start. Yes, they're the Three Amigos. I guess we're still calling them the Three Amigos, are coming together here in Ottawa on the 29th. And so the first half of the day, as it's set up, as I think many of you know, the President of Mexico will be arriving earlier and have a reception here and a state dinner before that. Then we're going to have the trilateral meetings in the morning, and then later in the day, the President's going to address Parliament. First of all, I do think a lot is going to come out of that, because just because these three leaders come together, which hasn't happened like this in a little while now, only good things happen. And what people fail to realize, and I thought maybe I'd give you some insight, because I don't know if I fully appreciated. In the time period leading up to the state dinner, you come out and everybody looks, wow, that was a pretty dinner, that was really nice, and you had a little meeting in the Oval Office. But we worked across the entire US government and the entire Canadian government for months, every single day, drilling through what are the things that we can work on together, what are the potential announcements, what are the things that we can consummate on this day, what are the things we're working for future days. So that work and that process cemented a relationship that was already very good, but gave these two governments such an amazing working relationship. So now what's happening? Now that once NALS was announced, the North American Leaders Summit, our three governments are doing the same thing. I literally just an hour before coming here participated on an interagency conference call combined with our embassy in Mexico and here in Ottawa with the White House, working through where are we, what are we doing, where are we both not only on logistics of the day, but where are we in terms of the kinds of things that we would like to announce and work on together, and what are the kinds of things that we're not going to probably announce, but we're still working on together. A lot is happening. And so sometimes you only see that day and those sets of announcements, but you should know that this doesn't just happen like that. This entails an immense amount of work. So now let's talk about trade. And let's talk about NAFTA. We make things together. And I say we, the three of us. We have integrated supply chain. The combined trade of goods and services between the three of us is about $1.2 trillion a year, combined trade of goods and services. I believe trade agreements enhance competition, enhance opportunities for consumers to have better product choices, better pricing in product choices because of that competition, and I think it enhances our competitiveness even globally. But you're right, it's 20 years old now. This agreement is getting, was at the state of the art 20 years ago. So where are we today? I do believe we need an updating of NAFTA, but I do believe we have it, and that's TPP. TPP is the update of NAFTA. So everybody keeps coming to me. So what should we do to update NAFTA? I said, it's here. We've got it. You have the three of us all party to it. There are 12 countries, represents 40% of the world's GDP, 25% of the world's trade, 800 million customers. And we have updated this in terms of environmental protections, on state-owned enterprises, on regulatory cooperation. We've updated this in so many different ways. Sure, there will be individuals or businesses that will point to this paragraph isn't going to be so good for my business, so, I'm not really happy. Mm-hmm. But overall, when you step back, I think all of us will see that this is an amazing opportunity. I think at the end of the day, as we get in through past the political rhetoric of a political season. You just had this last year. You know there's a lot of political rhetoric that goes on during a campaign. But as we get through this year, I am more and more confident that this will pass. And I believe that it will pass in most of the countries who have signed on. And I think that this agreement will be the standard of the day.
On the bilateral front, I think it was Chris Sands, an acknowledged expert on Canada-U.S. relations, who said that it's time for a renewal of marriage vows between Canada and the U.S., something that clearly occurred in Washington during the summit there. The issue now is, I don't want to strain the metaphor of the marriage, is where you take it in terms of increasing the solidity of the marriage, what concrete steps can be taken. I don't want you to scoop the president's visit up here, and I'm sure you won't. But give us a broad sense of where you think the areas where the relationship can move ahead.
So I came with a set of priorities. Those priorities I think are still valid, and some of those will clearly overlap with regard to the North American Leadership Summit. But number one, you know, the thing that continues to enable us to prosper is our economy. And we need to continue to do the things to enhance economic outcomes between each other. I talked about regulatory reform. I'm also leading a conference, leading a delegation of Canadian businesses to Washington in a week and a half for a program called Select USA. And one of the challenges that when I've traveled around the last few years, a lot of Canadian businesses say, yeah, I'd like to expand it in the US, but it's so daunting. You have all the regulations, and how do I do it, and where's the right state, and and they say, I want to do it, I can do it, I have the product, but I'm nervous, or I just need to be educated. And that's what Select USA is doing. We've actually set up this team within the State Department to educate companies as to how to do business in the United States, and almost act as a concierge of sorts to help them through the regulatory process and do this. And we also invite companies down for a bit of a matchmaking process. The president will be involved, Secretary of Commerce, et cetera. Where at latest count, we're going to have, if not the second largest delegation of any country in the world, and I'm really proud to lead that delegation. We need to continue to work, and I view that as a good marriage vow enhancement or renewal of different vows. We're also, I think we did a great job at the announcing out of the state dinner, working together on the border. And a lot of people come to me in very Canadian terms about thin and thick about the border, which Americans never really fully processed thin or thick about the border. But people ask me, don't you want the border to be thin? I said, yes, I want it to be thin for trusted traders and trusted travelers and people going on vacation. And I want it to be appropriately thick for the things that we both have questions about. And I think we enhanced that quite a bit during the state visit.
Well, picking up on that point, I think it was your predecessor, Paul Cellucci, who's famously said that security trumps trade. With hindsight, he'd probably be a little worried about the choice of the verb involved there. But give us your sense of whether, I mean, clearly what you said earlier suggests that you think a reasonable balance has now been achieved between an open border and security against potential terrorist threats. You were very optimistic about it. You felt the balance, I believe, has been achieved. There is a bit of a downside with the passports. Despite the low Canadian dollar, American tourists are not flooding to Canada. The number of tourists coming north is way down. So do you see any clouds on the horizon?
No, I actually, I see a real pickup. So we get data of the number of people traveling across the border. As you can imagine, it's nice because you have to go through border control, and we can get all these statistics. A lot more Americans are coming north, and they're coming north right now, and they're going to come north probably all throughout the summer. Not only taking advantage on the currency, but this is a beautiful, wonderful place to come vacation and visit. And I highly encourage Americans who would like to do international travel to just drive north and take a short plane flight and have an amazing international experience. I think things, I would tell you things are about as good as they could be. Get your Nexus card. I keep reminding people, get your Nexus card.
And the pre-clearance, I guess, is a big advance
Adding
as well.
we're going to add, once this is passed between Congress and Parliament, which I don't see any reason why it won't be, we're going to add 4 pre-clearance locations. So what is pre-clearance, just so we can define it? That's where you can go to the airport here in Ottawa or 8 locations across the country and check into the United States right there in Canada. So literally you can fly anywhere in the United States out of the airport that you're in without having to go through customs in the United States, which those lines can be
And what about extending
long.
it to land and train?
So that's the new agreement.
Yeah.
So the new agreement, this is only air, and so the new agreement adds land, marine, and rail. Mm-hmm. And so this is really great for cruise ships. It's going to be great. We're going to add 2 train locations, one in Montreal and one in Rocky Mountaineer out west, and we're going to also add Billy Bishop Airport in Toronto and Quebec City. Mm-hmm. So I think this was fantastic.
On environment, there was a very significant agreement in Washington to cut methane emissions from oil and gas. How do you build on that in the upcoming summit between the Prime Minister and President?
Well, there was a lot of agreement between Canada and the U.S. at the state dinner, and there was a lot of talk about working with Canada, but I think solidifying some large part of the environmental work that we're doing and trilateralize that work, I think is a really good thing. And we'll see how the work evolves over the next few weeks as we finalize all of that. But I continue to be very optimistic on this front.
On the geopolitical scene, what does the U.S. want Canada to do? I mean, clearly you're very satisfied with the role we've taken in backing the sanctions regime against Russia, mm-hmm. Against bolstering NATO defenses. Mm-hmm. Just today, I gather there was an announcement that the U.S. is seeking much more Canadian support in bolstering NATO in Poland and Baltic states, bolstering the NATO deterrent, and the prospect of, I think it's a 40,000-man rotating force there. Is that one of the U.S. priorities?
So the U.S. priority is to continue to find ways to work together with Canada throughout the shared areas of interest that we have in the world. What many people, let's start before we get to NATO, let's start with NORAD and understand what we have here. In North America, we protect North America together. It is a joint command with Canadians and Americans sitting at the table together, protecting the airspace in North America, with jointly reporting to the Prime Minister and the President. This doesn't occur with U.S. military anywhere else in the world. And so this is an amazing thing that we do to protect North America. In terms of NATO, a key partner is Canada in working together in keeping a strong NATO force. And I think that we continually will look to our NATO partners to make as large a contribution as they possibly can. As everybody might know, the U.S. contributes north of 70% of all the funds for our NATO expenditures. And so we are constantly looking for our allies to help share in the responsibility, both in terms of participation, but also in terms of expenditures, to be a good partner in that area. But look, Canada is a strong partner now and has been in the fighting Daesh in the DASH coalition. Canada's been a strong partner in dealing with diseases around the world, whether it's Ebola and now Zika virus that we're tackling together. We work together on shared interests in the Caribbean and South America, in Africa for maternal health and children and educating children. We work together on so many things around the world. So I wouldn't want to say there is this one thing that is the priority of the United States. The one thing that is the priority is that the US and Canada have an incredibly strong relationship, and we find ways to work together.
You mentioned NORAD, though. In this very room a few weeks ago, Bill Graham, a former foreign minister and defense minister, said that NORAD could become something of an empty shell, and this was an agreement that was crown jewel of the Canada-US relationship, could become something of an empty shell unless Canada joins the ballistic missile defense. He said that the threat is urgent from North Korea and potential other enemies, and it's essential for Canada to get on side with ballistic missile defense. And I presume, I mean, the U.S. clearly would agree with that assessment.
So the assessment is the following. Canada's decision to participate in ballistic missile defense is Canada's decision, and it is up to the Canadian government and the Canadian people to make the decision. We would welcome their participation if they so desire, but this has, I know, been an ongoing discussion, debate in this country for a very long time, and we continue to say that this is your decision as a country. You make that decision.
When I was writing a book I have on Canada-US relations called Doing the Continental, I had the fun opportunity and occasion to interview Bill Clinton. And I said to him, you know, Mr. President, how can Canada make its best contribution in the world? And he said, think about the unique contribution that Canada can make. Go into Africa, both French and English-speaking Africa, Haiti, and so on, and don't think so much about, as the military would say, putting another six-pack of F-18 into the equation. What would you say to or elaborate upon what Clinton, who I'm sure you also are friendly with, said to me that day?
I think Canada has a unique opportunity to do so many things in the world, and it isn't an either-or proposition. So it isn't that you should just do it this way versus that way. I think Canada, as a member of G7, as a member of NATO, as a large trading partner with us, as our next-door neighbor, as a participant in the world, can do multiple things at the same time. And you're doing it. And I applaud the country for that. But I wouldn't so narrowly focus on this is it, this is our strength, so we're just going to behave this way. I think Canada has the capabilities of doing so much. But I will say the following. You also have the ability of doing some unique things that a large nation like ours may not be able to get accomplished, have conversations at times, act as an intermediary into incredibly difficult situations. One of my most memorable relationships was literally when I had first arrived. I met one former ambassador, Ken Taylor, and spent time with him, invited him to the house, really developed a nice relationship with him. He's a true hero. He did something unique and different, something that benefited our country a lot, and I thanked him profusely for that.
That's a very good example.
But that's an example of something different.
Ambassador, thank you. Let's open it up now to questions from the audience with the usual entreaty that there not be speeches, but short, sharp questions. So I see a lady appearing
There's
here.
a mic over here.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was great. My name is Abby Dan, and I'm a former Trade Commissioner of Canada with over 30 years' experience. I'd like to ask you, both as ambassador and also as a senior American business person, what's your take on your people's view of globalization? You know, we see the press here and we hear things. There seems to be quite a vociferous reaction against globalization. And I'm just curious, how do you read that? Is it regional? Is it economic sectoral? Is it class-based? What's your take on that? And secondly, do you see any differences in public reaction to globalization between the United States and Canada?
Well, this could take a long time.
I'm so sorry.
No, this is a really great question and something that I've thought a lot about. So I'm gonna give you the Cliff Note version answer, and apologies because I really could speak on this subject for a long time. So post the financial crisis, and let's go back. Before the financial crisis, technology was ramping up, and technological change and innovation was allowing for increased productivity, but at the same time displacing jobs for a lot of people who had what I would call limited skill set, limited education or limited skill set. And when they lost that job of high-paying nature in manufacturing or elsewhere, they ended up replacing that. They all want to work. There's good Americans, and they, nice families and doing the things that they do, couldn't get a job that paid the amount that they were previously making. And then we went through the financial crisis, which was really rough on a lot of families because we went up to 10% unemployment. When the president was sworn, it was 900,000 jobs losing a month. And so you roll forward here in the 8th year of the presidency, and you would look at the headlines and you'd say 10% unemployment to 4.7% unemployment. We've reduced our debt to GDP on an annual basis to in the 2.5% range. Interest rates are low. Housing prices have increased. Auto sales are at record levels. Stock market's tripled. Wow, that sounds pretty darn good. But what was also happening during this process was that there was a ramp up in investment by many American companies in new technology and equipment, which we spurred on through accelerated depreciation after the crisis, which we do after lots of recessions, to spur investment. But they invested in this technology. So I'll give you the good news and the not so good news. The good news is today, American companies are as competitive as maybe they've ever been. Their technology, their efficiency, their balance sheet, their cash flow is as good maybe as ever in the history of the country. The bad news is that they can do this with significantly less workers. And you can make 1 million widgets with some fraction of the workers that you made that same 1 million widgets just a few years back. And so the people who've lost those jobs tend to have less skills. In the United States today, unemployment, if you have a college degree or higher, is 2.4%. 2.4%. But if you dropped out of high school, it's 7.1%. And then there's everything, obviously, that's in between. So you sit down, and what some people don't realize, right now today, there are 5.7 million jobs open. There are companies looking to have people work. Why? And this is the largest that we've seen, maybe in history, definitely largest since through the crisis. So what's happening? We do not have the skill sets in this new modern economy to fill those 5.7 million jobs at the level we'd like. And people are underemployed. Well, if you worked at a factory and you made a fair bit of money and now the factory modernized and then now you've lost your job, you are not a happy person. You are very frustrated. And so, it's hard to blame a robot or a computer or some technology. So that frustration is bleeding through politically. And I think that, one of the things that people are easy to take blame and say, the job must have moved somewhere because the job's gone. It must have moved overseas. It must have moved to this country or that country. But those jobs, many of those jobs didn't move anywhere. They just disappeared because we have modernized. And so the good news is our very young are able to get retrained and retooled, and through education and through programs, and whether within companies or within educational institutions. The challenge is those that are a bit older. It's a tough road now. And so you ask me why we got to this place and where we are. I actually think, and by the way, technological change is accelerating at an increasing rate. And that increasing rate means this is not going to change real soon. And so the frustration may be, and we're looking at a number of people falling out in participation in the labor force. That participation rate may very well be falling off. Well, not only are we retiring because of the baby boomers, but it may very well be it's falling off because people are so frustrated because they don't have the skill set to operate in the economy at the level to get the higher paying job, and they only have the skill set for the least paying job, and they may say, I'm too frustrated.
Thank you.
But again, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, and having grown up in the financial service industry and worked for a lot of years, I do think about this a lot, and I watch the political climate a lot. And so people are wondering where this frustration is coming from. It's coming from a number of areas, but I do think that's a big contributor.
Do you see any difference in the sensibility here in Canada to the States, or more or less it's the same reaction?
I don't know if I have as good a handle here on it, and I defer to many of you experts here in the room. As we all modernize together. So if we want to stay competitive in the global economy, we're going to have to do this, because if we're not modernizing our factories, someone else is going to do it somewhere else in the world, and we're not going to be competitive. So you have to do it to remain competitive. And so that's the problem that's happening here, that we're all going to be racing to be more efficient and more productive, which may result in more frustration among the workforce.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sir, you have a question.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us this evening. My name is Ron McIntosh, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. Among my many adventures in the Foreign Service is I spent 4 happy years in Washington, D.C., handling environmental issues. So
awesome.
I'm very happy to hear that that work is continuing. Most of my career, I must confess, however, has been spent with dealing with issues with Asia, Asia Pacific, and especially trade and investment questions. So I was interested in your comments about TPP. The good news for you is you don't have to convince me that Canada should ratify TPP. There is some points of resistance, which I'm sure your embassy has noticed from time to time. I think we can overcome them, but I'm not sure where the problem in getting TPP through. I'm going to make sort of a comment and get your take on it, and I hope it's not seen as a rude comment, but from all I've read, all the analysis I've seen, TPP seems to have the life expectancy in Washington of a Canadian snowball on the hot Capitol steps in middle of August. I'm not sure. Things can turn, things can change, but that's an assessment that's very common, and I'm afraid it may be true. However, what do you think?
Well, coming back from Resolute, the snow was still pretty good. So trade agreements, and this trade agreement in particular, has been counted dead a number of times. If you remember TPA and watching the debate and discussion around TPA, and the first vote, it didn't go. And everybody in town here told me, well, that's it. TPP is over. You guys are out. I can't believe you wasted all that time. And I said, no, you're wrong. This isn't over. And then TPA, of course, passed, which gave the president his trade promotion authority to negotiate and to bring this deal to the point where everybody signed. So now I hear the rhetoric, oh my gosh, these anti-trade rhetoric is coming up, and the political candidates and everything else, and I hear the same people telling me, it's dead, this isn't going to happen, it's going to be like that snowball in July. I'd say not so fast. I'd say let's see how the remaining part of this year goes. And there are a number of people that voted for TPA in Congress that still have the belief that this is the right thing. There are a number of people that didn't vote for TPA because they were concerned about their election. That election is upcoming, and at some point we'll be behind them. And so we'll see how this comes out, but I am increasingly, believe it or not, optimistic that this will pass before the president says goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, sir.
I am Akash Maharaj. I'm from the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. The good news is I'm not going to ask you about the outcome of the American election. The bad news is that I am going to ask you about the American election. I think all of us expect democratic elections to always be hard-fought and often bitter, but from the outside, it does seem like an unhealthily large percentage of the partisans of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump loathe and despise one another, and indeed seem to feel that there is no place for them in the vision of the United States espoused by the other. My question for you is, do you think that is an accurate representation of the level of political division in the United States, or has it been magnified through the lens of the media? And irrespective of how serious it is, do you think that there's anything that can be done to persuade people who see themselves as not having a place in the other person's vision of the United States that they do in fact have such a place?
So I've been involved in some political campaigns, and the emotions that take hold of people who are involved with campaigns one way or another, they can get very extreme in those emotions and their feelings. And I will tell you, I think once we get through this process, first, I have confidence in the American people. I have confidence in our system. I have confidence in, as much as people sit and shake their heads, I think that this has been going on a long time in the history of American politics of either looking at how Congress functions or how the White House functions or who the people are. But our system was uniquely created by the framers of our Constitution in having an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And I think at the end of the day, it works pretty darn well. And are there times do you wish, because you're rooting very strongly for one side or another, that's a different outcome might happen? I think that people are going to look back on this presidency, and he probably had one of the most challenging Congresses in the history of his White House, or at least for recent history. And I think people will look back at his presidency of being incredibly productive of what he was able to get done, whether it was with the Iranian agreement or Cuba or climate change or health care or reformulating the auto industry or the environment. And people are going to look back and they're going to say, wow, you got all that done in light of the challenging environment. And so I have a lot of confidence in the system. Your second question, I'm sorry, your second half?
Do you feel that there's anything that can be done to persuade the partisans of the two candidates that in fact they are not, that they can disagree with one another without despising one another? In other words, is there an irreconcilable, does this reflect an irreconcilable divide in American
Obviously,
society?
the ideal is that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And that would be the ideal. I think that if we could find venues for people to spend a little more time together, I think people will realize we're all human beings and we all come from a certain baseline. And that people, if we broke bread a little more together and spent a little more time together, while we may have partisan differences, we don't need to be disagreeable with each other. That would be ideal. I'm always optimistic. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we only have time for 2 more questions, so there they are.
There they are.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Sorry, short. My name is Emily, and I'm currently doing an internship with Global Affairs Canada. And I had a quick question regarding your trip actually to the Arctic. And
Yeah.
I know that it's a very big topic of collaboration between the US and Canada on multiple topics. My question was about the potential conflicts and disagreements that Canada and the US have with the border on the seabed between Alaska at north, where Alaska and Canada divide. And I was wondering if that was part of any of the talks right now and how it's involved with the collaboration that we will be having on the different topics with defense and
I think as we
resources.
sit here right now, I think we just agree that we see it differently, and it is not a primary topic that we're focused on a bilateral basis. And I think that there is a current process of mapping out Arctic shelves that is taking place with all the Arctic participants. And I think everybody's trying to define their boundaries and their borders, and everybody's making submissions. So I think that in the ideal, I think we should let that process play out, and there's no need for us to sit down and have any extensive conversations without that process playing out a little bit. But thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, Ambassador. My name is Sherman. I'm a research associate at Carleton, and I'm doing a master's at Harvard. So I love your country, and I have my Nexus pass, so don't worry about that. I'm one of the few people who have it, so I'm proud of that. I want to go back to when you're mentioning the regulatory standards with RCC, the Regulatory Cooperation Council. I wanted to know more about, is there a method in this proposal that would benefit Canadian trade interests, and how, how can you sort of sell this to foreign ministers here and business interests that are here, and how you also said that there are many companies you're taking over. I think that it's like a government program you set up that they would get to know how and where to sell, which states are more appropriate for the products they're trying to mass produce or to make the most revenue out of. So just more curious about RCC and how that benefits our interests in trade. Thank you.
So I'll tell you a couple stories. So let's just make it really tangible so everybody can get their arms around it, which I always find when we talk about specific products that people can understand this. So I'm sitting here, I have a lunch at my house, and I'm with the head of Campbell Soup. And the head of Campbell Soup turns to me, and she says, I'd sure like to make more of my soup in Canada and ship it to the United States, but I can't. And I said, really? Why is that? She says, well, the labeling and the can size and the packing and how it's done have different standards than I do in the United States, and I can't bring them over. Oh. And then the person who was sitting 2 seats away from me, who worked at Coca-Cola, said, we'd like to make Diet Coke more in Canada so we can ship it into the United States. I said, but you don't do that? She says, oh, no. That's because the labeling on the can of Coke that you have for aspartame is different than we have in the United States, and I'm not taking that label in Canada, and I'm not going to take it in, and so it makes it very different. And then I was talking to a cosmetic manufacturer who said lipstick, SPF, the sun protection factor. In the United States, you can just put that in. In Canada, it's considered a drug and requires about $150,000 to $200,000 worth of drug testing to go through. Oh, and car seats, baby seats. We all want our babies to be safe in our cars, both in the United States and Canada. But technically, if you were going to follow the regulations of our 2 countries, you'd have to drive to the border and switch out your Canadian car seat and put your US car seat in to keep your baby safe, right, because there are very different standards. And so there's product after product after product, and I've heard these stories by companies over and over. But let me tell you where it worked really well. And that was a year ago, in the post-Lac-Megantic world, where we raised the standards in terms of our rail car standards on shipping oil. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves where one was racing, Canada, appropriately, and we understood why, very quickly to change the standards in rail cars, given this horrific experience that happened here in the country. But we found ourselves realizing that these cars cross back and forth across the border over and over and over again. And the manufacturers were getting very frustrated with us, and the leasing company was very frustrated. And so US standards were then going to be different than Canadian standards. Well, Secretary of Transportation flew up here, and we met with the Minister of Transportation, Lisa Ray, and we got together, brought our teams together, and we worked out common standards together such that the railcar standards, we have the same goals. We wanted them to be safe, and we were both operating. We ship a lot of oil and petroleum and chemical products, but we got together and harmonized it so that we didn't kill two industries at the same time and hurt trade between Canada and the US. So it's a perfect example of that.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Could I have one last question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just, it's very short.
This is a question that you will translate for us from
Yeah.
sign language. Please, yeah, I think, sorry about that. We take this question, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, hi, my name is Aziz Khan. Aziz Khan, I work for the Mint here in Ottawa. And I'm wondering if you compare the United States, people have told me that people that are disabled in the States have been doing a lot of promotion saying persons with disabilities should be hired, should be able to be rise up in the ranks of business, etc. And we have the same thing here, where disabled people want to be able to progress in the career ladder. And so I'm wondering what your perspective is, Canada, U.S. comparison in that regard.
First of all, thank you very much for the question. I appreciate that. You know, we have to appreciate the differences that everybody has. And some of us have disabilities. Some of us have differences in terms of sexual preference. Some of us have differences in terms of religion. Some of us have differences in terms of race. We all have differences. But we need to create a world where people can be treated equally, can have equal opportunities, regardless of where they've come from, what background they have, and what disabilities they may be affected by. We have the American Disabilities Act. We've continued to push forward to adapt our working environment and living environment to create standards. That's all about those regulations that we talked about. To create standards to create the ability for people to live and be very productive in our society with the challenges that they may face. A lot of people have come back from serving our country that did not have disabilities, that now have disabilities. We have to create an environment where those people can be productive members of our society, and we have to accommodate for everyone. So whatever we're doing, I think we're not doing enough, but we're doing a lot more than we ever have before. Thank you for your question.
Ambassador, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, chers amis du Conseil, I have the honor as the new president of the CIC to thank you for such a substantive and lively discussion. Listening to you, Ambassador, I was comforted by the thought that you are not only the ambassador of the United States in Canada, but you are a clearly committed and very warm advocate for Canada, not only as you cross our country, including our far north, but also in Washington and other parts of the US. The Team Canada business group, under the auspices of one of your programs that you are leading, and who will be meeting the President and other distinguished leaders of the United States shortly, just before the President's visit here to Canada, is remarkable, and I'm happy will get, doubtless, great attention across our country. As the new president of the CIC, I have the distinct honor and pleasure to follow someone who has shown such dynamism, such enthusiasm, that his 3 years of leadership and that of the board that many of the new members of the board will be stepping into. I think that we're privileged. I don't know if you're aware, Mr. Ambassador, but the Canadian International Council has 15 branches across Canada. The Ottawa National Branch is the most active by far. And it's thanks to the dynamism and the enthusiasm of people like both Davids. And we're very grateful. I'm very grateful to you all, the members of the CIC, and I know that I and the board will be counting on your continued involvement and engagement, particularly as we move forward this fall to a membership drive, to a fundraising drive, and thank you in advance for your support. Merci tout le monde. Thank you.